of NYU Washington, D.C., it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Abramson Family Auditorium for today's event. NYU Washington, D.C. and the American Association of University Women will present a series of panel conversations through October 2017 around AAUW's Stand Up to Sexism campaign. Please join us online or in person for this discussion series to learn more about how to fight gender bias in your own thoughts, at your workplace, and through your activism. This is the second panel in this series entitled The F Word, How to Be a Feminist in the Workplace. Today's discussion will focus on the challenges women face while navigating their feminism at work. It's my pleasure to welcome Paige Robnett, AAUW's College and University Relations Manager, who will introduce the panel.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second discussion, our second panel series from both NYU Washington, D.C. and AAUW. As Michael said, this second panel is titled The F Word, How to Be a Feminist in the Workplace. The F word we're referring to here is a little different than what you might be thinking. We're referring to feminism. I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't admit to myself that I was a feminist until my sophomore year of high school, which is shocking considering the amount of time that I actually spent on the basketball court trying to prove myself, or to myself and to others, that I was just as good as the guys. Like many women, I was afraid of labeling myself as a feminist for fear of being judged. Years later, I came to my senses and I realized the importance of feminism, specifically intersectional feminism. In college, I ended up majoring in women's studies, and I actually brought an AAUW student organization to campus to fight for women's equality. Now, working for AAUW, a women's advocacy organization, I have the honor of fighting for women's rights every single day. Other women I know are not so lucky. AAUW created our hashtag Stand Up to Sexism campaign to encourage both women and allies to stand against sexism and share how and why they do that in their local communities. Here is a video that has helped AAUW spread this important message.
So today we're
first and third? Yeah. Well, good. I mean, I think this page is set, if you agree.
I agree. Yeah, there's
Agree?
probably a couple
Yeah, no,
changes
definitely
that
agree.
for
Okay.
the most part it's different.
Well, great. Then let's move on. Page 5.
Don't be so emotional. Women aren't natural leaders. You should smile more. Let's face it, women have heard it all, especially in the workplace. AAUW's research report, Barriers and Bias, the Status of Women in Leadership, explains that gendered microaggressions like these contribute directly to the gender leadership gap. Even seemingly small sexist comments hurt women's confidence and devalue women's work. And everyday sexism doesn't stand alone. It often comes coupled with ableism, racism, ageism, sizeism, transphobia, homophobia, religious discrimination, you name it. So what can we do as a society to make women's professional lives better? How can we combat sexism at work and beyond? AAUW exists for women to push past sexism on campus, in their local communities, and in the workplace. One of the hurdles of addressing sexism is first identifying it and then starting a conversation to stop it. Being a feminist and being a professional are not mutually exclusive. Our experts on our panel today are going to share some insight into how everyone, regardless of their gender identity, can be a part of the change. And now it is my honor to introduce the amazing, incredible panel that we've assembled for today. And I'm going to start first with our moderator for the afternoon, Nicole Quiroga, General Manager of Telemundo Washington, D.C. and Richmond, Virginia. Thank you. Next, we have Jennifer DiZora, writer and founder of GetBullish.com, an advice site for career-minded feminists. Next, we have Dr. Avis Jones DeWeaver, author and founder, CEO of the Exceptional Leadership Institute for Women. Next, we have Patricia Valoy, Latina feminist activist, blogger, and civil engineer. And last but not least, we have Susanna Weiss, a freelance writer. Thank you, everyone. Nicole.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. It's such a pleasure to be representing Telemundo and to be with such an established panel. So good afternoon. We also appreciate everyone that's joining us via live stream and watching on C-SPAN. So welcome. It's wonderful to see such an amazing interest in this very important and critical topic. So really, let's get right down to it. Being a feminist in the workplace today. One of the main challenges of being a feminist in the workplace is dealing with the daily occurrences of sexism. Sexism, as we just said, sexism in the workplace can take many forms, coupled with ableism, racism, ageism, sizeism, transphobia, homophobia, and more. It's important to remember, though, that sexism and discrimination can look different to each one of us, as we are all from different intersectional identities. However, we all really do want the workplace to be a more accepting place. Today, we will be discussing the challenges that each of us face in the workplace, from microaggressions to harassment, and how really to overcome them. So, Susanna, I'm going to start with you. You've written prolifically on gender issues, sex and relationship, and women's health. You've covered many topics relevant to this panel. But first, to help us put workplace sexism in context, could you please explain a little more about gendered microaggressions?
Sure. A microaggression is something that is not a very noticeable or obvious form of oppression, but in the workplace, it might be something like using phrases like IT guys, or in the tech industry, I saw a lot giving out only male shirts, little things that make women feel excluded. Or a microaggression can be anything, but it could be a racial microaggression, but a gendered microaggression would be a small action that people do all the time without realizing it that make women feel like they're lesser. Or non-binary people or other oppressed genders. And
I would say without us even noticing, from the way that you just said it, this is something that immediately I can tell you happened maybe 3 times today. Is that right? It's so something that happens and we are unconsciously we're unaware, I would say, right? Mm-hmm. Patricia, as a feminist writer with a degree in civil engineering, can you tell us about how you've incorporated your feminist, Latina, and STEM identities, sometimes known as feminista or STEMinist, which I personally have never heard, but you learn something new every day.
Tell everybody learn it, STEMinist. I was gonna become a thing after this. To be sincere, I never personally had a problem with merging all 3. I always felt like there was no way that I could put aside my Latina identity, my identity as a professional in engineering, and my identity as a feminist. And I always wanted to incorporate all those 3 things into my activism. So I did have a hard time, though, finding a place that I think understood what that meant or what that looked like. So when it came time to join activist circles, it was either, well, this is a feminist thing, or this is an engineering thing, or this is for Latinos. So I had to kind of create and carve out my own space. And I started by doing that with my own blog and kind of writing about those intersections. And never kind of belittling one or the other. It was always like, this is all the things that I am, and I'm going to talk about it as it happens to me all together, all the time. And then little by little, I think it became more accepted. I still heavily, though, identify, I think, mostly with feminist circles that are intersectional, because I find that those are the places that really accept my other identities, allow me to talk about it, to express them, and to be my full self.
That's great. Do you find that you are often having to choose one space or another? I know that you said that you have identified your own space, but when you go into the work where you might have a male-dominant population, do you have to choose what space to walk in, or?
It does happen often. I'd lie if I say that I'm all the time, all three, unashamed. I think that when it comes to my workplace, it's very hard for me to just be like a full-out Latina feminista and talk about racism and microaggressions and all of these things that I would perhaps talk about in feminist circles. So I try to focus more on STEM issues. I talk about statistics, I talk about women in STEM, I talk about people of color in STEM, and I try to use numbers. STEM people love numbers, I love numbers, and it's a way to kind of bring a little bit of that, a little bit of my Latina and my feminist activism into the STEM world. And likewise, it happens when I'm in feminist circle. I have to think about how I speak, the language that I use, and what's going to get people's attention, and that's really all that matters. But it's part of being an activist. I feel like if I'm not making an effort to get my audience to get invested, to get interested in my message of what I'm trying to teach, then I'm not doing a very good job.
I think it makes for a dynamic conversation, and the fact that you have so many pools to choose from. I think it's kind of an art to be able to pull together, who you need to be at that moment to heighten or further your agenda. So congratulations on that. I'll move over to Dr. Avis. Hi. You are diversity, equity, and inclusion solutionist and a career strategist. You have built your career helping women achieve their personal goals as well as their professional goals as well as their personal ones. Mm-hmm. It doesn't appear that there's much of a demand for men's career strategists. And certainly this right. And this profession would look much more different, I would imagine, for men clients. So what does the need for your profession, in other words, helping women, what does that say about institutionalized sexism in the workplace?
It says that it is, in fact, institutionalized. It is normalcy, right? And so, and it has a lot to do with, we've talked about microaggressions, it has a lot to do with the reality of unconscious bias and how that proliferates our culture. Really when people think of the word leader, most people, the image that they have in their mind, unfortunately, is a man, and more specifically, it's typically a white male. And so when we talk about women being able to pierce through that pre-existing cultural paradigm, and be able to assert themselves and be respected as leaders in the workplace, it takes a little bit more maneuvering and more advanced thought than what men actually have to put into it. And so it's this extra burden, I would say, that women bear when it comes to being able to either navigate their way to leadership or just navigate their way in male-dominated professions. There are different skills that are associated with that unfortunately women have to take on this extra burden to learn and be able to be good at in order to be able to achieve the positions that they are well qualified for and deserve to be in the first place.
Jennifer, as a business owner in a feminist space, it looks like you operate in almost an entirely female world. All of your employees, conference attendees, your consumers, your fans are mostly all women. So do you still encounter sexism in that area?
First off, I would like to say what a great pleasure that is. And the first, decade plus of my career was not like that. And so, existing in a world made up almost entirely of women, at least professionally, is fantastic. I enjoy it a lot. It's refreshing, like a cool feminist beverage. So couldn't be better.
Never heard that. That's great.
Yeah. So one thing that I really enjoy about it, for instance, there's been a lot of writing about how women apologize too much. Like we should all stop saying sorry. Like there's a Chrome extension you can get that changes "I'm sorry" to something else. Like millennials or snake people or something. Changes it so we don't apologize so much. But here's the thing. I mean, it's like, are women apologizing too much? I mean, not if everybody's doing it. You know, like Canadians apologize a lot, and it's not a problem as long as they stay in Canada. You know, it's like a problem when one Canadian comes to an office in America and then they're the only one apologizing because not everyone's in the same system. But if everybody's apologizing, I mean, I feel like there's so much language that we engage in, you know, just culturally that doesn't have a literal meaning. I mean, when you say, you know, like, have a good day, like, you don't, that's not really, you know?
Right.
There are so many sorts of niceties that we engage in that are not intended to give a literal meaning. So I feel like when I'm working in an office with my 2 employees, you know, it's an office/warehouse. So my company sells kitschy feminist goods and socks with swears on them, stuff like that. And we're bumping up against each other a lot, like physically getting things out of boxes sometimes and just bumping up. And so it's just constantly like, oh, sorry, 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 sorry. And everyone's doing it, and it's super not a problem. And when you say sorry, it doesn't mean like, I feel like I don't deserve space in the world, like I've done something wrong, I'm a bad person, I have low self-confidence. No, like saying sorry is a social signal that says, I would like to keep getting along with you awesomely. You know, that's all it says. You know, like sometimes when you say thank you to somebody because you've just given them money for a product, do you need to say thank you? No, but it's nice. You know, like everyone, sometimes you have like you buy a donut and you and the person you bought the donut from, like you each say thank you to each other like 4 times. And nobody has low self-confidence here. It's just a social signal that you're sending that says like, I want this transaction to go smoothly. And I would like this workplace to be pleasant, you know, and everything's good. So I do feel like, you know, while obviously, you know, not all women are the same, but nevertheless, in an all-female workplace, I do find at least that aspect maybe conforms to what you might expect, and I enjoy that. I do, of course, have to do business with men sometimes. It does happen. Occasionally, men come into the office, and they're like, wow, it's warm in here. I'm like, yeah, it's like 74. So I'm not going to wear a sweater in the summer in my own office. I'm not doing that. But you know, it's nice to have kind of a centering, like women are the default here. In fact, in my online store, I have a funny anecdote. We sell women's socks, and so I didn't bother to say women's in front of the socks. And then I started selling a few men's socks for holiday shipping, you know, holiday shopping. So like women could buy things as gifts for men, or some people just like men's socks, that's cool. In any case, so I started getting male customers buying the socks and just assuming that if they didn't have a gender on them, that they must be men's socks. And I got like customer service emails from some guy who's like, I bought all these socks and some of them are women's socks. And I was like, what makes you think they wouldn't be? You know, like you just bought socks from a feminist web store. I don't know, so process to return. But women are the default where I am, and I feel like a little bit of that in the world is a nice thing.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with all of that, and I think you know, the conversation usually sways to how women hold women back. And while you're right, I know, and while you're right on the saying, I do that too. I say thank you, or I'm sorry, and I get told too, you know, no, you don't have to apologize. Whereas that's a great way of saying it. It's not a weakness, right? It's just a social way of getting along much easier.
But men should learn.
And, I agree. But my question to you is, though, for the purpose of I guess, identifying things that we women can stop doing to each other, do you find that in your female space, there are things that we are doing to each other subconsciously or not? I mean, that we shouldn't be doing, that we're holding each other back and not really knowing we're doing it?
I think I just pick good women.
Good. Good. Good.
Oh, can I tell you a little anecdote about
Please.
the last time I tried to have a business meeting with a dude, though? I do have an anecdote. This happened. So one thing that's nice about being in a feminist workplace is I do business with men, but I don't need it. You know, there's a huge difference between like I'm going into a job interview and I really need this job to move my career forward, or like this guy wants to be my client, let's have lunch, or something like that. So I was having coffee with a guy about, you know, he wanted me to come teach a class in London. And that would be a cool opportunity. It sounds nice. Anyway, I'll just skip to the good part. So he asked me a bunch of pointed questions about where my child was. No. Yeah, that happened. And I was like, it's a coffee meeting. There are so many places that a child could be for like a 1-hour meeting. I mean, just so many perfectly safe places that I could, anyway. And so that was very strange. And so after that, and a bunch of other bizarre, like kind of personal questions, he then went on to say, I love working with mothers. Oh. And like anytime someone said, like it sounds like it's set up to be a compliment, but by definition it's going to be a stereotype. Like, I love working with identity group. Like, no, nothing good can come from that. There's nothing. Stop talking. So I was waiting for it. You know, he's like, I love working with mothers. And I was like, please tell me why you love work. Here's the answer. Because they expect so little.
Oh, God.
And they're so grateful.
I can't even begin to comment on that comment.
It,
Can't even.
that really happened. And it was nice to just never talk to that person again.
Well, being that this is made for TV, we're just going to move on from that. But thank you for the example, which is really very true, I think, in our everyday lives. And so what I'll open this up, the next couple of questions for the panel. Again, the title of this discussion is The F Word, How to Be a Feminist in the Workplace. Of course, the F word, notwithstanding the last story, is here to say feminist. How or why it's outwardly identifying as why is it that when we identify ourselves as feminists, this is still so taboo in today's workplace? It's almost frowned upon if you say that you're a feminist. Why do you feel it's like that?
I guess I'll start only because the total opposite of you. I work in male-dominated fields where most of my meetings are devoid of any other women but myself, and usually also devoid of other people of color. So I found myself very afraid to use the word feminist around my coworkers. And I think I probably went years without saying it, and being very cautious about the word that I would use when I had to travel for a presentation or a panel or anything. And it was always like, oh, I'm going to talk about women in engineering or something. And I got tired of feeling like I was walking on eggshells around the language. And I had to kind of question, like, why is it that I'm scared? And I started realizing that I was just worried that they would see me as, I don't know, militant, angry. I thought that I would be treated differently. I thought that for sure they're like, well, if she's a feminist, then she's probably talking about us. I mean, believe me, they think I talk about them all the time. So I had to almost just get this inner strength to be like, I don't care what you think about me. I don't care what you think I do in my activism. I don't care that you read my writing, because I'm not saying anything that you don't also experience every day, because a lot of it is coming from your mouth. It's like a lot of it is. So, little by little, I learned how to kind of weave that kind of that word into conversation. So I'd be like, oh, this weekend I'm going to go to a, feminist conference. And they're like, oh, are you? I'm like, yes, I am. And I'm like, don't you have daughters? It was kind of like a try to be like, oh, I think your wife would really, really enjoy it, actually. You should tell her about it, and kind of weave it into that. And I would definitely get a lot of side-eye, a lot of sighs, a lot of concerned looks. And eventually just became like, oh, that's just, the feminist in the office. And I was absolutely okay with it. And it felt freeing to finally be like, this is who I am. And I did find that they were a lot more careful around me after I came out as a feminist. I came out. It was like this big deal. I remember thinking about it like the night before, like, I'm going to use the word feminist in a sentence today in my office. But, after that, I changed something. They definitely thought about their actions a lot more. When they would say something sexist in front of me, like, I just had to look at them. And they're like, I know, okay, I know, I got it, I apologized. I was like, yeah, you should. It was just kind of like that scolding look all the time. And I didn't want to become everybody's, feminist teacher in the office, but it felt very powerful.
Well, and I think that, you're gaining the respect, right, at the beginning where you're not as sure if you want to come out and say something like that. What does it mean to them? What does it mean for me? Right. But ultimately, heightening awareness in the office is exactly what we want, right? And so I think, and I congratulate you on your efforts. Susanna, I want to ask what your experience with that has been as well.
I think people are so afraid to call themselves a feminist because a lot of people don't know what feminism means. When I've said it, people will say, oh, but you seem pretty feminine, or, oh, what's your problem with men? And so if people's image of a feminist is somebody who hates men and is out to get everyone, then of course they're not going to like it if you say you're a feminist. So part of it is educating people that feminism means you believe in equalities. And yes, that does mean men will have to give up some of their privilege. So you don't have to water it down and say, oh, not all men are against women. We shouldn't have to do that because sexism exists even if it's not all men. But so we shouldn't have to cushion our language, but we just need more awareness that feminism is about equality and things aren't equal now because many men believe they are. And once they can see that, oh, actually things aren't equal, they're not looking to become female supremacists or something. They're just looking to have an even playing field.
Dr. Avis, on a very random note, have you ever been asked to plan a holiday party or get a cake or something with birthday cards in an office environment?
I haven't, but it's not that much of an unusual thing. A number of women do experience that as if they are the sort of office mommy sort of role that they're expected to fill. And you know, it's important to make sure that people respect you as the professional that you are. To have that be the default, you know, burden, once again, of the requisite woman or only women in the office really shows, once again, the pervasiveness of, you know, sort of institutionalized sexism in the culture. And though it's nothing wrong if one wants to do that, and that's your voluntary choice to do that every once in a while, really it's very disappointing to see office cultures where that is the expectation.
And the norm, if you will.
And the norm,
Sure.
exactly.
Sure. So no birthday cakes for us.
No.
Jen, going back to you as a business owner in your space, it looks like you operate in an almost entirely female environment. Outside of the problems that we discussed, how do you see moving forward? Are you looking to maybe implement men into this to create a reverse balance as we are talking about making everything equal, if you will? How do you feel about that? How do you see that?
Does there need to be more space for men at my, I don't know how to take that question. You know, at such a time as I were hiring, of course, I would consider male applicants, and as I would be legally bound to do. But yeah, I mean, I feel like so much of the rest of the world is not the way my space is. You know, I feel like things are good. Things are good. You know, actually, the conference that I run so far has been in the neighborhood of like 55 people. So I run a small conference for feminists and who are interested in careers and entrepreneurship. And it has occurred to me, like, there comes a certain size where I think that you know, I will open that conference and say, you know, like, sure, dudes, come at it if you really want to attend a conference on this topic. But yeah, I think, you know, right now I'm really excited to just carve out a little space.
Have you ever caught yourself expressing internalized sexism toward another woman? And this goes across the panel. I know if I stop and think about it, there are moments, not often, but there are moments where I might have some kind of a feeling toward another woman that I maybe am not always proud of. But certainly I can take back and you know, review with myself and then change it, which is the only way that we will create change. I wonder if you could share some vulnerable moment where you had, I guess, a reaction or a thought or a feeling towards another woman that we could all learn from, know that we are not alone in having some negative responses, but that we can change in doing so.
When I,
Well, you know, I do think that there are moments, particularly when you're in a, if you're either in an all-female environment or you're in an environment where there's a lot of women on the team, that it is easy to maybe fall into that stereotypical trope that women can't get along. And you might come into that situation with expectations that there might be some quote-unquote cattiness, you know, all of those sort of stereotypes that are placed upon women. And so I think it's very important that when we find ourselves in those situations, that we try to not sort of fall into that trope, and try to take the time to understand each person as an individual and their individual personalities. You know, I've certainly experienced situations in which I have felt a bit of tension, and I didn't really understand, was it something that was generational that was going on? Was it something that was going on having to do with just the different experiences that women might come to a specific instance with different backgrounds? Or was it this issue of, this woman having a feeling that she needed to be sort of like the top woman in this specific space? And sometimes it's those tensions there. It is a reality sometimes, around this issue of oppressed populations where, there are certain instances where you might have an individual who may tend to want to stand out as the preeminent one in that space and almost sort of buttressed the oppressing entity in order to be the one that sort of stands out. And so when you're in those sort of situations, whether it's by race, whether it's by sex, it's a very sort of delicate situation to navigate. But I think ultimately the solution per se, if there is one to that, is to try to sort of take a step back and understand ways in which you can connect with people on an individual level, rather than trying to sort of subscribe to the overarching paradigm where one might want to fall into this notion of trying to sort of explain it all away with these sort of already existing negative stereotypes surrounding women.
Fair enough.
If I can just ask that,
Please.
My environment, like I said, is the total opposite. And it's actually quite the same. Even in male-dominated fields, I found myself, and very ashamed to say, but when a female colleague was brought into the team, you'd think I'd be so excited. Like, finally, I'm not the only woman here. And I found myself having a little tension with her, a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of competition, and it bothered me. It bothered me a lot, to the point that I was like, I need to kind of almost write this out and figure out what is going on here. Why do I see her, and only her, as my competition, more so than anybody else in my team? And what I think was happening is that, in the engineering field, there's just not enough female role models in very high positions. So the way that I saw it, I perceived the situation was, there's only space for one of us at the top. They're not going to promote both of us. We're not both going to be successful here. And I expected our male bosses to look at us and pick one, right? You're going to pick the one girl to make it. And it was not necessary for me to think that way, but I mean, I would imagine that that's how they feel too, because you really do. And when you do see these positions, boardrooms and engineering reports, it's usually only one woman. There really, really is. So you start kind of visualizing, where your career is going and thinking like, I got to push her aside or else I'm not going to make it. And, I had to, and it was painful for me because I feel, I'm talking in activist circles and I was like, we need more of us in engineering. We need to get paid better. We have so much to contribute. And then to my own colleague, I have this attitude with her, and we both with each other. I felt it very much, and we never wanted to work together, and it was very short. Until finally, I had to force myself. I said, no, you know what? She's your colleague. You're going to talk to her. You're going to be her friend. You're going to be her, your workmate, and it got better from there. But I had to kind of unlearn a lot of that, of what I feel is my role in this male-dominated world, to just be tough all the time and to scratch everybody out of the way till I make it, because it really is better when we do connect, when we are, friends, when we help each other. I do think that we climb a lot faster when that happens.
Well, and first of all, please
I was
go ahead.
just going to say, the sad reality is that your perception to some degree may have been correct. I mean, what's really necessary is that there needs to be a cohort of individuals, right, not just one or two, because that leads to the situation where there is this feeling of competition, and oftentimes not based on theory, right? Oftentimes based on your experience in terms of what you've seen, where there is usually really in practice this idea of just having one woman, one person of color, exactly. And that's it. And so that sort of sets up this competitive environment from the beginning. So companies can do a better job, quite frankly. Absolutely. There's more than one woman, there's more than two women, there's more than three people of color that would be qualified to do this work. And companies need to stop being lazy. I'm just going to say it. It doesn't take that much effort to find qualified people, a diverse array of qualified people. And they need to invest in that because, quite frankly, this country is changing. Demographically, we are quickly turning over into a majority people of color nation. And if companies want to be able to relate to the population that they are seeking to serve, they need to do a better job of making sure that they have diverse leadership at the top.
And I was going to say, you almost took the words out of my mouth. First, thank you for sharing a vulnerability. It's not easy to, admit some, kind of not wrongdoing in your thinking or whatnot, or maybe you're not as proud of it. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I think it allows us all to move a step forward together. And yes, infrastructurally, I'm not saying, internally, the organization was setting you up for almost not failure, if you will, but a level of competition that's not going to be. It's not going to bring you forward in the sense that, of course, you're going to feel that way. You are the only woman, which shouldn't be done from the beginning, and so therefore, I appreciate your sharing that. But I would say the same thing. That company and all organizations need to be a little bit more responsible from the ground up. I'm going to switch over to just something very basic, and that is our appearance. As women, we go into an organization and they have a formal dress code. They tell you how to wear, what to wear, not to wear, more or less, some more than others, right? But there's always that unspoken rule of what you can and cannot wear. Is the skirt too short? Is the top too low? What are we looking at? How is your hair? Tell me about your experience, and we can start this way. How has your experience been with what you choose to wear and how you're perceived in your organization or in your circles?
I haven't had a personal experience with that, but one way I get out of that is working from home, where I get to decide. And I've talked to other women who say the same thing, that that's one of the reasons working from home has become so popular. Finally, they're so relieved that they don't have to pile on makeup or feel like they have to worry about how they dress or being judged by how they looked. Of course, it would be ideal if workplaces didn't make women feel like they had to work from home, but I've noticed that that's one way women especially, feel liberated by that trend.
Anybody else?
I feel like I can write a book about the subject. Oh man, I had a really hard time finding my groove in terms of what I could wear as a professional woman in engineering. But some days I was, in a construction site and I was in a hard hat and boots, and then another day I was in the office wearing a pencil skirt and high heels. And it was difficult because I didn't have, like I said, any role models to look up to, so I don't know who to emulate. And I remember the first few months, fresh out of college, my first job, I was wearing business suits, and I hate suits with a passion. I don't even like pants. I don't like to wear them, I swear. And I'm wearing blouses that are ill-fitting, and I'm trying to copy my male bosses because I was I don't know what to do. And then little by little, I was I was suffocating, and I felt like I had to kind of bring a little bit of my own personality there. And it took a lot. I remember coworkers being like, "Oh, you're always so colorful." And I was like, that's not a compliment, but thank you. I knew that they were kind of trying to say something about my clothing. And I would have, females, other women in the company also remark on my clothing, oh, you should be careful. You work with a lot of guys. That's, be careful with your skirt. It's too tight. It's too short with your cleavage. And it was so humiliating. And I had to persevere, and I had to be no, I don't care. That's their problem, not my problem. And just kind of fashion one because I care that much. It sounds a little bit naive and a little bit silly, but for me, I think being able to dress how I wanted to dress and wear prints and skirts and high heels and wear my hair how I wanted to do it in this male-dominated space, it felt like a rebellion. That was my first way of saying I'm a feminist. I don't care. I'm going to change this culture, whether you like it or not, even if it's just me doing it, So I had to do it. And like I said, it was always a personal victory till eventually I became the weirdo in the office, wearing big skirts with flowers on them and, flowers in my hair. And I don't care. You know what? Because I have to go to the field. I'll pull out of my desk my work boots, my jeans, and I'm let's go. Let's do this, right? So as long as I'm prepared, I had no shame. But It was so difficult. It really, really was.
For me, it's very interesting because for me, it's been less of a wardrobe issue than it has been a hair issue. And I think this is a reality for a lot of black women in particular. I know, for example, when I first started my locks, I've had my locks for 19 years now. And I know when I started them, my mother was petrified. Okay, so I started them when I was in graduate school. And she was like, oh my God, you'll never get a job. And I told her at that point, if an employer does not want to hire me because of what's on my head rather than what's in my head, then that's clearly a place where I would want to work in the first place. What I've found in practice for me, and a lot of it has to do with my industry. Most of my career was in the nonprofit space and think tanks. I now own my own company. It might have been a completely different experience in a corporate environment, but I know for me, it has not necessarily been an inhibitor for me personally, given where I've chosen to work. But I will say that there are very disturbing things that we see that's going on in broader culture. We know that there was recently a court decision that said that it was okay for employers to dismiss applicants because they have locks specifically. Wow. We know that there was a period of time in which some of the armed forces were forcing black women not to be able to wear their hair naturally, and there were some changes that were made to change that ruling, but that was an initial ruling. So we're even seeing, for example, we just saw recently with Bill O'Reilly insulting Maxine Waters specifically about her hair. And so there seems to be this issue, particularly as it relates to black women in hair in the workplace and in broader culture, related to various microaggressions and macroaggressions that can be not only disturbing, but also prohibit their ability or our ability to be able to even get a job in the first place. And that's very disturbing to me.
It sounds like in your experience, though, you've been able to kind of move around some of these more the problems that you would have in a corporation where what you wear, what your hair looks like, although you did mention the hair, but for the most part, nonprofit think tanks, in areas where you might not be dealing with the most simplistic feminism or bias issues.
Right.
What have you experienced personally that has affected you in your professional career?
I think that for me particularly, it's really an issue of intersectionalism. It is that, I've had a very interesting career in that part of my career has been very solidly within black spaces. Part of my career have been very solidly within women's spaces. And what I find is that though both of those spaces, the things that we work towards are very similar, the two do not intertwine well in reality. The reality is that black spaces largely tend to focus on male-dominated issues. And the reality is that women's spaces largely typically focus on white women-dominated issues. And so there really aren't that many spaces that I believe in a very well thought out and in-depth and strategic way focus on the needs specifically of women of color. And so that's part of what I've been able to do in my career to try to sort of create that space and expand that space. But that is a space where I feel like there needs to be a lot more work. That to me is the part of sort of this feminism at place work or gender diversity work that I believe still needs a lot of attention paid to. Because when you look specifically at, leadership, for example, yes, women are underrepresented as it relates to leaders in the workplace. But to the degree that we are seeing some penetration in that space, it's almost exclusively white women. And so there needs to be a sense of camaraderie among women, period, where we're not just satisfied with a woman being in that space if the only women in those spaces pretty much are white women. White women, quite frankly, need to be able to take up the flag to say, I'm not satisfied with this definition of gender diversity. If gender diversity itself is not diverse, then it's not truly gender diversity. And we need to work towards that in order to get there.
Thank you. It's a really good point. Anybody else? I love it. Yeah. Very well put. And going past, did you want to say something?
Oh, sure. I was going to speak to the appearance
sure.
question.
Sure. Yes, please.
Yeah, it took me a lot of time in my early life to figure out how to even remotely begin to dress myself for class reasons, actually. So I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I went to Dartmouth, and it was very LL Bean. And there's just so much LL Bean, and
That's great.
so I had these like these snow boots that aren't real snow boots, like fashion snow boots from the JCPenney clearance section where my mom worked, not in the clearance section specifically, but at JCPenney, and you know, and they leaked within like 2 weeks because you can't wear JCPenney like glossy plastic boots in a snowstorm in New Hampshire. So it took me a long time to figure out how to dress myself and kind of become acceptable to, you know, in the workplace and, you know, kind of pull it together and not look, stop talking. But, you know, I feel like that was a long time ago. And, you know, I now, this is, like, I genuinely enjoy wearing things that are really appropriate in workplaces. it's just my personal taste. And like I just had a baby, so I'm so delighted to be wearing real pants with like a zipper and everything. It's fantastic. But you know, to that question though, in terms of what kind of appearances are appropriate in a workplace, I feel like because this is just, I genuinely enjoy dressing like I am now. I think people sometimes expect me to think that everyone should dress like that or look like that. And so, you know, at this stage of my life, I think I've reached like the peak of appearance privilege of my lifetime in the sense that, you know, nobody gives me any junk, you know, for what I look like, but also no longer, you know, really as sexy as I was when I was 25. So I don't get any BS about that either. And so I can pretty much just go unnoticed in a lot of places. So what that means to me is that when I'm in a conversation where someone says, I can't believe what she is wearing, they expect me to agree. And it's my job not to do that.
Got it.
So I feel like I have put up defenses of just all like people wearing stilettos at a science conference. And I'm just like, why could you not wear stilettos at a science conference? Please give me a reason. So I mean, that I think is where the appearance question kind of lies for me now.
Wow, very well put, and thank you for sharing that. Moving past the, I guess, physical appearance, there is also the behavioral situations where, ladies, as successful leaders, you have a place at different tables where your voice is often asked for, when your opinion is asked for, and your voice will be heard. What about when you experience situations where a male will interrupt you, where they will tell you a lewd joke, where they will demean you in some way, but not a very obvious way, but just that touch point where he kind of knocks you down in terms of your power in his eyes, I will. What kind of situation have you experienced with that?
I write about this a lot, actually. So this is the number one issue I think I deal with in presentations that I give and articles that I write. And so one of the most effective strategies that I encourage people to just get started with right away is speaking up for other women when this happens. And I find that a lot of marginalized people in a workplace are really good at keeping track of who they resent and who they think. Like there's a running tally in there of like, these people have done something bad to me and these people have done something good to me. So people tend to remember if you can jump into a conversation and say, oh, so I see that you did like Lindsay's idea, you know? And you're now attempting to steal it for yourself. But you know, give that credit back to where it belongs, or like, oh, I want to hear what she had to say. Let's get back to her. You know, like, so bringing the floor back to other women, giving other women credit for their ideas. If you can do that publicly, like in front of bosses, that's a great thing. That can also happen in an email. You know, you can send out an email to the group or to a boss, to a manager that says, hey, I just wanted to throw in a little more information in favor of, you know, Tamara's idea or something like that. So publicly giving credit to other women. And I find that people will absolutely notice that. They will remember it. Hopefully they will repay the favor. And I find that while I absolutely also recommend speaking up for yourself, this is a lot easier than that even.
I get a lot of, I mean, there's workplace interruption, which is like a daily occurrence. It happens to all of us. But for me, I think the one interruption that bugs me the most is when I'm presenting. You know, I'm talking about women and people of color in STEM, and without a doubt, the first person to raise their hand is always a guy. And I'm just like, ugh, and I went with it for a long time. And the questions were never questions. They were always like anecdotes. I like faculty members loved to be the first one to like, well, actually, you know, in our department, we have 3 female professors. And I'm like, that's fantastic, dude. Or, you know, or like, you know, tell me numbers of like the number of women that they graduate. And it was like all these like statistics that mean nothing in the grand scheme of things, but in this like one tiny college in New England, he felt like, well, you need to know that like not everywhere. You know, one time a young man I don't know, I was talking about sexual harassment in the workplace and et cetera. And he interrupted me to say that Bill Clinton was a sexual harasser. And I was like, okay. And I was like, is he here? Like, I was like, I don't work with him. And he's like, I just wanted to say that. And I think this was around the election, and I think that he felt that I was talking about a certain someone else. And I was like, I really was not. Believe me, I do not think about other people that much. And it was very strange. So now what I do is before I even opened, for questions, I was like, I'm really sorry about this, but I have to prioritize women and people of color. And I was like, I know that that's gonna bug you, it's gonna, you might feel uncomfortable, you might even walk out and you can do absolutely whatever you want, I don't care. But I was like, I need you to understand like why I'm here, who I'm here for, who I'm talking, who needs me more. And I was like, if you have any questions, like after people of color and women have asked their questions, then you can raise your hands. And like, it worked wonderfully. And I feel better about it. I feel like I think that my presentations end on a better note, a more positive note, other than this like super animosity, because it was always like a white person. It was always a white man. And I got tired of it, honestly. It's really tiring.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that. Anybody else on?
I think similar to that, just really quickly. You'll have people that will sort of try to correct you when you're actually correct. Right? That is the most annoying of all to me in my experience. And it really requires you to just stand firm in your facts and sort of bury them in their falsehoods. Yeah. And it just requires,
a lot of men
that.
ask me while I'm like, showing a statistic or a graph or something, like, what was like, oh, where did you get that data from? And I'm like, let me just finish what I'm saying. Or, what was the number of people that were like interviewed for that, study? And I'm like, okay, dude. And I'm literally like, I'll send it to you in an email like after we're done. Like, I had to be prepared because otherwise, oh my God, I feel like they try to trip you over a lot.
Yeah.
I was once explaining a math problem on Twitter at someone's request. It's a weird thing to do, but someone had a math question, and I write test prep books in my spare time. And so I was explaining, it was like a straight up GMAT question about probability, and I was like, I could totally explain this in 7 tweets. And I did, and then a bunch of dudes jumped in and started arguing with me, and they were so wrong, and I was so right. And so after arguing with them a little bit, I logged out of my account and I created a new Twitter account with a white man's picture. Nice. And then I jumped back in and said, Jennifer is right. And they all stopped. It was literally a picture of the young Christopher Walken with the name John Manjohn.
Oh, that's great.
So I still log in as him every now and then, and just, anyway, it worked.
It's disturbing and funny all at the same time.
If you
More
need backup,
disturbing.
you can tag him, and he'll just come in and be like, no, you were correct.
Wow. Wow.
No one should need that kind of backup, but he's there,
So, taking a turn, I guess, have you all experienced a work environment that actually made you feel comfortable, that actually you felt respected and you felt equal to those around you? Has that been an experience that you've been able to go through and feel that? Or has there always kind of been a sexism issue in the places that you worked?
I had one workplace, it was in the tech industry, where there were a few people on the engineering team who made it very clear that they were interested in feminism. They would have a Slack chat group and they would share articles about it. So when I ended up experiencing an instance when we were at a company dinner and one guy was teaching one of the interns pickup artist tactics, he was like, go to a gay bar and then the women's self-esteem is so low and then you swoop in. And I was like, that sounds kind of sleazy, and then they all jumped on me. And then the next day I emailed one of the people who I noticed sharing articles about feminism, and I just told him, can I talk to you about this weird thing? I don't really know if it's an issue. And then we talked, and he validated me and was like, yeah, that's super inappropriate. And though I didn't want to go public with it, he talked to the engineering team, like, we have to be mindful about how we speak after work. So I think just going out of your way to, and this was a white man who I think the burden especially falls on, to go out of your way to make it clear that this is something you care about so people feel like they could come to you.
Great, thank you for sharing.
You know, I worked at a company where I felt like, so everything was good, things were good, and I felt like a lot of the things I had been told about men and women in negotiating and in the workplace turned out not to be true here, in the sense that I was the hard driving one and the men that I was working with were like, whoa, like where did that come from? And you know, so that to me was, you know, it was a slightly male dominated workplace. All the men were like pretty chill, and when I kind of approached it like, oh, this is, you know, when the stereotypes did not apply, is what I'm saying. And, you know, a lot of people were just very comfortable kind of going with the flow. And, you know, it was an okay experience, and it's helpful to sometimes see that, you know, the stereotypes don't always apply.
Fair enough, and it's good to hear that it's out there. We have a lot of work to do, obviously. And in that vein, given the experiences that you all have gone through and looking into the future, if you had a workplace wish list, if you will, what would be some of the elements that you would include on that wish list so that equity is better reached faster?
So blind resume review. Start with
Right,
that.
that's a good
So,
one.
you know, if you, and this is something that I think that even as an individual, if you're an individual at a company and you don't have hiring power, I mean, you might be an intern, you might be, you know, admin assistant or something like that. Still, like, it's very common that a boss will dump a bunch of resumes, you know, electronically or physically on that person's desk and say, okay, well, give me the top 12, or weed out the people who don't have a such and such qualification. So, I mean, you could be, you know, at an entry level position, you're sitting at that desk with a stack of resumes. Your boss says to toss out all the ones that have some quality. While you're doing that, you could totally like put a Post-it note over the names. You know, or you could black them out with a marker, or you could put codes over them, like number codes. And when your boss is like, what the hell is this? Heck, sorry. But when your boss says, you know, what is this? You say, oh, this is best practices now. And it is. So, you know, this is resume number 103. And then there's a list that the boss is not supposed to look at until after they've made their decisions that says the name of person number 103. So, I mean, I don't know if you'll get away with that, but it's worth a shot. Only costs you a couple of Post-it notes. And of course, if you're at a higher up position, I think it's the important thing is recognizing that we all have implicit bias. And so even though you might have a lot of faith in your own ability to make fair decisions, you know, you still put the Post-it note over the name.
Well, and I think that brings up a very good point in terms of the implicit bias. We all do, as we said before, walk around as such. And there are many things that we can't help, right? We are born with and we are taught certain things. So it takes a keen amount of awareness and, you know, dedication to getting over this kind of bias for you to be aware of the things that you do and to make them better. But saying that, I say that because I think this conversation can go on, and it is in the little things that we're going to find the ability to change, right? Because you can read all of these amazing, incredible articles, but it will be that one piece or that one day or that one detail that you notice that will be the change in your behavior, as opposed to one full sweep that's going to cause a massive amount of change. It's little by little, drop by drop, right? So in looking at this wish list, if you will, you know, having said, you know, a blind resume, I think is an excellent idea because it really is a big portion of where it all starts. And we've seen many studies where they actually change the name from Latino to a you know, more mainstream name, or from a man to a woman. We've seen them, and they've ultimately turned out exactly how we thought they were going to turn out. And so, you know, I appreciate that. Does anybody else have any thoughts as far as a work wish list?
I'll just quickly chime in. That's actually an excellent point, both of you. And there's an app called Blendor, actually that was developed by a black woman engineer that allows for blind review. So it takes out names, it takes out pronouns, it takes out those sort of identifying things that would make it difficult for people to be able to be judged fairly, quite frankly. I would say beyond that, I think that companies have sort of gotten them, at least they pay the lip service around diversity. I'll at least say that much. But they need to also really focus on creating an inclusive environment. They need to understand that diversity in and of itself is not enough. And so when you do have hires, diverse hires and diverse talent, the way to be able to nurture that talent, the way to be able to retain that talent is to create an environment where they know that they're valued, where they're respected, where they're heard, and where they have a real chance at ascending up the ladder. Because if they don't see those opportunities opening up in a fair way, they're going to leave and go to another company, as they should. And so companies need to understand that diversity in and of itself is not enough, that you really need to focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity. And when I say equity, I'm talking about having an equitable chance at getting opportunities to ascend up that ladder, so that you're not basically creating an apartheid-like structure at work where all of the diversity in your company can be found at the lower levels. But when we talk about leadership, it's basically a whites only or a male only space.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, kind of, it's a little bit of what you guys are saying, but in terms of hiring practices where I have like the most issues too, because it's a lot of it, like when you can't even get your foot in the door. So like blind resume reading is fantastic. But what I've noticed, at least in my industry, is that people get hired because of connections. And
Absolutely.
I mean, take it from me, I didn't even know what an engineer was when I was growing up. I had no idea. I had never met one. I didn't know. So when I was going to college and then applying to schools, like my pool of people that I can say, hey, I'm looking for work and I need help was very, very limited. So I could only send resumes, blind resumes, to companies until somebody was like, oh, okay, she sounds okay. And what I found is that a lot of times the way that people are hired is just like, you know, this is my friend's son.
That's right.
And I was flabbergasted at how common it is. I honestly didn't even know it was like, I knew it happened, but I didn't know how common it was. And I mean, to this day, like you would get resumes and it's like, oh, this is so-and-so's nephew, this is so-and-so's son, you know, like just you have to review it because you can't just hire someone without it. But it was like you knew that that person was going to get the job out of the blue. And when it came to people that they never heard of, it was always this very like critical review. And it bothered me because the things that I would pick up on resumes that I thought would make like excellent candidates, and I'm like, I want to work with this person. They sound fantastic. It was always, you know, that they were more than engineers. They were activists. They were curious people. They were involved in a lot of things. And I thought that that made for people who were creative and exciting. And I literally sat across people reviewing resumes that were like, oh, look, he likes golf. And I'm like, what? And I'm like, or like, he plays the guitar, I like guitar. And I'm like,
Wow.
Okay, guys. Like, you know, and it was like, or he went to so-and-so school and I went there. Oh, that's a big one. Like, that's my alma mater. So he must be a good candidate. And I was like, that's not really how it works. You know, and I got really frustrated to the point that I almost didn't want to give feedback anymore on like new hires because I didn't feel like I was being listened to. And it's that diversity thing. You know, you can hire a ton of people of color, a ton of women, and if they don't feel valued, if they don't feel heard, if every time that you bring them into meetings, you're not actually listening to them, you're not incorporating them in decisions, you're not making them feel like they have a way to succeed, to get ahead, to make a difference, and they're gonna leave. Yeah. Or they're just gonna stay there until they're just like, all right, I'm out. I'm gonna move on and open my own business and do something else. And then they wonder, like, what happened? What happened? Right. I'm like, really, guys? So they really do, the onus is really, really on them to do better.
Fair enough.
You know, I was reading a business book on the train on the way here, and there was this chapter. I mean, I definitely read a lot of bro business books that I hate because I don't know. I was a philosophy major. Like, I like disagreeing with things. I enjoy reading things that I hate so I can hate them publicly later. But this book had a chapter about good hiring, and it specifically recommended that somewhere during a lengthy interview process, you find out if the person will be a good culture fit. And he specifically mentioned that you should find out what kind of music they like, because everyone in the office should like the same kind of music. And I'm just like, okay, like you look like you might like the Eagles or something. You know, like, really, is this a thing? That's super not okay at all.
Not okay. Not part of the onboarding process,
I mean, like,
right?
We all have to like all of the same sort of pop cultural things and kind of, so it was really just very, very unacceptable. And yeah, that thing with people, you know, bringing in their friends and their people they went to college with. There's an article on the Harvard Business Review they say never read the comments, but I didn't think that applied to the Harvard Business Review. Like I thought it's kind of a buttoned up. It does. So it was an article about how most white managers aren't trying to be racist. They just have a lot of white friends and they like to help them.
Wow.
And this was based on it was based on studies. It was extremely well sourced. I mean, this article it was all facts and figures. It was a very well sourced article. It was not an opinion piece. And I have never seen so many angry people in the comments who are like, this isn't true. And I'm like, it's really well sourced. It's really well sourced. It is clearly true. This is the Harvard Business Review. So everybody calm down and accept that this is a thing.
Wow.
So
Very scary, very real apparently, but very scary. Ladies, in a minute, we're going to go ahead and open up for questions. But before I do that, I first wanted to thank you so much for bringing your experience, your intelligence, your passion to this panel. Obviously, we're all here to learn from your personal experiences and from the things that you've been able to glean from, going through all of these sometimes very awkward experiences to come to where you are today. That being said, if you could just in 30 seconds or less, give me one piece of advice that you would tell your past self or your future self of what you've learned as you've gone through your professional journey. We'll start with you, Suzanne.
My number one piece of advice is to ask for things that you don't think you'll get. If you think that wouldn't work unless, then follow that thought and do the thing it wouldn't work unless, because often you're really surprised by how much people are willing to give you.
Great, thank you.
Piece of advice I would give myself is don't try to be nice all the time. Like, I swear, I tried very hard, I think, to fit in. I wanted to be the liked person in the office, and I didn't want to have any problems with anybody. And that got me nowhere, and it wasn't until, I think, not that I was rude to anybody, but I think I was assertive, and I kind of stated my opinions, and I didn't care to disagree with people, that I felt like things got better, at least for myself. I certainly started feeling more like, oh, I have agency. I'm not just like following orders from somebody, like I know what I'm talking about, and that definitely was a huge confidence boost, and I wish I'd learned it a lot sooner.
That's great. That's a great one. Thank you.
I would say being good at what you do isn't enough. I think that oftentimes women believe that if you just put your head down and you just do a great job, that eventually the spoils will come your way. You have to understand that not only do you need to be good at what you do, you also need to become comfortable with self-promoting yourself, with letting people know that you're responsible for the outcomes of your work. Because if you aren't comfortable with letting other people know your grit that made that happen, then it becomes easier for other people to be able to take credit for what you've done.
I agree, and thank you. It's okay to brag.
Yeah.
I think so. Thank you. Jennifer.
yeah, I think sometimes trying to fit in a place where you cannot possibly fit in. Like your best attempt is going to get you a sad second best because you just can't fit in that environment. Trying to fit in a place where you can't possibly fit in sometimes just makes you look subservient, and that's not what you want. Sometimes instead of a kind of failed attempt to fit in, the thing to do is to, I hate to say be yourself, because I don't think that's true either. Like, when most being ourselves, like if I was going to be myself, I would not ever wear a bra, and like that's not how.
Excellent.
But what I want to say is, there are places where you're never going to fit in, and you can spend your whole life trying and trying and trying and not quite getting there. And sometimes going in the opposite direction is what makes people respect you, and that's sometimes counterintuitive.
That's so true.
I've always been outspoken to the point that I had a lot of parent-teacher conferences as a child, and I've just gone with it. Like, I don't put myself in places where that's going to be a problem. And there are a lot of other workplaces. I did once make cookies for an office full of people, and no one ate them because apparently I'm not a real woman. I don't know, but everyone looked at them like they were poison, and I felt sad. But that was an attempt to fit in at something that was never going to work for me.
Right.
And sometimes the other direction is what makes it work.
Well, and thank you all so much for sharing your insights, right? That's what we're here to learn from. Susanna, Patricia, Dr. Avis, and Jennifer. We're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. And I have one over here. Yes, ma'am.
I'm over curious.
I wonder if you could come to that.
First of all, thank you. There's 2 mics. I don't know what to do. I'm so curious what you think, just your personal thoughts on this Google fiasco. If you don't know what I'm talking about, they patted themselves on the back for closing their pay gap, and then now they're being, sued or investigated by? Nobody knows what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay, you seem, Doctor, you know what I'm talking about, don't you?
Well, you know, it's a shame, because the reality is that this issue around pay equity is something that is a huge problem that we face, and it's pervasive. Unfortunately, it's not just a Google thing, it's an everybody thing. And the problem is that it just got worse. This person at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue just signed a piece of an executive order which actually rolled back an order that President Obama had in place, which required at least government contractors to report how they paid women and people of color, so that and everyone basically. It required transparency with regards to pay. And that's really what it will take for us to be able to attack pay equity. We need to make sure that companies can no longer hide under this veil of secrecy, because as long as that is in place, there will always be the means, the mode, the motivation for pay inequity. And you mentioned this thing about mothers. I mean, one of the areas that oftentimes we don't think about when it comes to this pay inequity issue, it's reality as it comes to race, it's reality as it comes to gender, but it's also reality specifically for mothers. Those are some of the most underpaid people in the workplace. And so there are pay disparities across the board, and until companies are legally required to divulge how they pay people, I am afraid that we will never actually overcome that challenge.
Thank you for your question. We also do have questions coming in on social media, so we'll take turns, one here and one there, if that's okay with you all. And for the sake of the audience, if you're not seeing it, you are seeing it. Okay, could the panel provide their own definition of feminism? Who would like to start?
I'll start, I guess. For me, I get asked that question a lot. What is feminism? And I'm very much a proponent that, I understand when some women don't want to call themselves feminists, because my mother was one of them, not because she didn't believe in it, but she just didn't really understand the word or the concept of it. So I always tell myself, I'm like, feminism is just like you helping yourself and your sister out, right there. It's not this I think people see it as you have to have this huge impact in the world and you have to be out there every day to everybody and being vocal. And it is. But not everybody is able to do that. Not everybody has the stamina, the resources to be that. And I said, if I can just take care of my neighbor's baby for a few hours, that is already me being a feminist, performing something for my community. So I always kind of try to remember just being very grassroots, just being very local, and very committed to the people that I say that I'm supposed to help, because there's this talking and there's statistics and they're saying all this, and then there's actually doing, and believe it or not, you actually just providing some support to somebody right next to you has huge impact, and it makes a world of difference. I would say that be impactful, be meaningful.
Thank you. Did you want to?
I would. I feel like people often conflate feminism with female achievement. And there's a lot more to it than that. And that's why you get these questions. I don't know if you've ever been trolled by anyone who's like, if you're such a feminist, then why don't you support Kellyanne Conway? Or lots of other women who's, thank you. Right? We didn't really turn out for Sarah Palin either. I mean, but why? Is that just feminists are biased in some way against certain women? I don't think that it is. I think you need a definition of feminism that's clear, that feminism isn't just being a woman who's out for yourself and your own achievement. That is not sufficient. And so I think it's really important that any definition of feminism involves tearing down barriers for other women and marginalized people. Feminism is not just go out and get it, girl, you are so successful, you are therefore a feminist. That is benefiting from feminism. It is not actually practicing feminism.
That's a profound distinction.
That was great, yes, absolutely.
Yes, I would just say that I really tend to more self-identify as a womanist because that definition to me is more intersectional in nature. But generally speaking, I think the end result is the same in that it's the idea that there is that women have autonomy over their own decisions, that they are not precluded from their ambitions, from what they seek to achieve based upon discriminatory systems in society and working towards tearing down those systems where they exist.
Fair, thank you. And Susanna, if you wanted to add.
People often say it's the belief that women are equal to men, but I think it's also about challenging what being a woman or being a man means and understanding that gender is very fluid. There aren't just women and men, those are social constructs, and all the ways we categorize people are social constructs, and ultimately living in a world where those categories don't limit anyone.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on to another question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I just want to thank you all for being here today. I think all of us have gotten so much out of this, so thank you. The question that I have actually piggybacks off of this and something that you said, Patricia, about, being assertive. And so by you being on this panel, obviously you're using your voice, you're really putting your beliefs and everything out there. But for women who aren't comfortable doing that, for women who hear a microaggression and grin and bear it, what advice would you give those women in order to find their voice so that they can combat some of these instances of feminism that they may experience?
I feel like I'm always jumping in first, so please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, everybody has a different way, I think, of finding, that voice that we're talking about. For some people, it's writing. I think some people feel a lot more comfortable, even just journaling, and then maybe moving on to a blog if you want to, really, really go out there with your opinions. For some people, it's music, some people, it's art. There's, more than one way to be vocal. You don't have to just kind of talk all the time. And I find that, to me, that was the way that I kind of got my bearings when I started just talking about my experiences. My first blog post, and I'm not a writer, at least I don't feel like I'm a writer, even though I write all the time, was just kind of, a diary entry almost, and just this is my experiences and my first day of work and et cetera, and this is how I felt. And it was just very raw. There was no editors. I wasn't trying to speak to any particular audience. I didn't know if I had an audience. So it was more about liberating myself and stop holding that in. And then I found that a lot of people were feeling the same way. And suddenly people were telling me oh, I read your blog post and I felt now I can finally speak up about it and I can talk more and this and that, and I can join a protest and come here. And I was like, really? That happened to you? I didn't really know that I was having an impact. I didn't know that there were people out there that felt the same way that I did for a very, very long time. I would say just baby steps. It really doesn't happen overnight. I don't think any of us here would say that one day we just woke up and we were ferocious, feminists, I'm gonna go out there and take a little. Some days I'm still not that person, right? And I pick my battles a lot. I really, really do. When you work in male-dominated fields, you cannot every single day be combative, be fighting. And there's a lot to fight, but you have to kind of do a lot of self-care and say that dude is not worth it. I'm gonna ignore that. It's not worth my time. But that I need to address because that has bigger impacts. You kind of choose that little by little. But start small. And then eventually, I promise, you'll build up on that, and you'll find yourself one day surprising yourself with who you are and what you're capable of doing.
Anybody else?
May I?
Yeah.
I'm so excited by this question. This is so. I feel I speak up very loudly, and I sometimes get private Facebook comments oh, I wish I could have said that. I'm like, okay, well, but I think that in the workplace. Here's the thing. Networking is not just going to events and shaking hands and giving people your business card. If there's some blowhard in the office, interrupting everybody and taking all the credit for himself, you're not the only person being affected by that. And when you make eye contact with other people who also just got interrupted and steamrolled, that's networking. When that dude will not shut the F up, right? And you're you know, and you look around at all the other people who are being silenced, like that is networking. That is relationship building right there. And you can take that to the next level. And sometimes that's like drinks after work where you complain about that and then hopefully turn that into something constructive. But a lot of, you know, even in a very traditional workplace, I mean, so much of what happens is relationship building that happens behind the scenes, like getting buy-in for your idea before you take it someplace or before it gets presented in a meeting, like getting your stakeholders to buy into that idea. And so a lot of that is really behind the scenes kind of quiet stuff. And, you know, just for everybody who's taking up all the airspace, you know, there are other smart, quiet, powerful, sometimes very resentful people who you could network with and be friends with.
I love it. I love the angle on that one. It really is a brilliant way of looking at
Resentment
things.
is very
Right? It's
motivational.
excellent.
Really.
I agree. So we have another question coming in from Alan Callender. How can male allies help stand up to sexism? Thank you for your question.
You gotta talk to other dudes when we're not there.
There you go.
Oh, sorry. Right.
Shut up and listen. It's a good one. Practice what you preach. Yeah, talk to your bros. There's a lot that I think men and male allies can do that involves just other men without having to kind of steamroll us and come and join our discussions, because that's not really the space for them. But
And let me just kind of push back a little bit, because, you know, maybe a male ally might not want to go into the locker room and talk about how we can stop steamrolling women. This might not be their topic of discussion, right? So how, you know, in hopes of them unifying their thoughts and you know, having that collective positivity, that's great. But what do you think could be something that you could tell somebody individually that they could do at this moment, for example?
Well, I would just say, like, for the examples that we were talking about previously, you know, when you see something, say something. Just like with terrorism, do it with the sexism. Exactly.
You know, like they always talk about what they can do, but they're like never in places like this, or very few. So come to our panels, come to our discussions, come to our presentations, read what we write, buy our books, watch our movies, like buy our products.
Now.
There's so much.
Absolutely. But seriously, like if a woman is in a meeting and you're seeing that her idea is stolen by a man, then you be that person who echoes her. You be that person who checks him. You know, when people are being considered for that next promotion, you make sure that you are that person if you are in that position to be sort of that person on the inside, that you make sure that you present a diverse slate of candidates. I mean, there are things that you can practically do that do not sort of maintain the status quo. You need to be there in the moment and be willing to stand up and not just always say that that's the woman's responsibility to take up for other women. That's your responsibility too.
Great, thank you.
I just wanted to add, if you're in a leadership role, mentor a woman, but in the same way that you would mentor a man. So what that means is not like, here's my worldly wisdom, you know, like, I think there's a TED Talk by Susan Colombo, I think her name is, about, in which she tells an anecdote about a man in leadership who was mentoring a man and a woman differently. You know, he's mentoring a woman in sort of personal excellence and mentoring a man to take charge of the business. You know, and so there's a difference, you know, when you talk about mentoring, between mentoring and sponsoring. You know, when you mentor someone, it's like, you know, here's my wisdom. When you sponsor someone, it's like you tell them how to get promoted and then you tell other people to promote them. And that is something, if you're in a role to do that, then do that for women, or at least do it for women at least as much as you are doing it for men.
Fair enough.
I think a really easy way that you could do right now is share things on social media, tweet our articles, retweet our tweets, because without taking over the mic yourself, that amplifies our voices.
Susanna, that was great. Thank you so much. We have one question over here.
Hi. So my question is more on the online workspace in the blogging world. I used to blog when I was in high school and into my first couple of years in college, and I started to face a lot of trolls out there, and even trolls that were, you know, people who I thought were my friends. And it was hard for me to kind of face that negative opinion and continue to blog, and I actually stopped. How would you encourage someone like me or all the other bloggers out there who are afraid of the trolls to keep going?
Susanna, okay.
The trolls are hard. At the beginning, I remember it was very painful to see those comments. Now they're comical to me. Like, I'm past that, and now I use them in my presentations sometimes, like to make fun of them. So you can actually really turn that around and like, you know, screenshot that, put it on Twitter, put it on Facebook, and just like let people make fun of them, right? like seriously, it's I don't know, for me, it's a really, really good way to just release that and be like, you did nothing to me. I'm laughing at you. My friends are laughing at you. The whole internet is laughing at you. But when it really gets to the point where it's too much, or you're not really in the mood to laugh about it, and it's okay. Like, I have been very upset by some things. I shut down my comments, or I have to approve comments. Approve comments are my favorite things, because then you can just be like, delete, delete, delete anything that you don't want. And it's your blog. Like, you do not have to host any voices that you don't want to host in your own personal space. Like, your blog is like your home. It's your diary. You allow the people that you want in there, and if they don't want to be there or they want to participate negatively, then you're like, you're out of here. So don't be ashamed. Don't feel like you have to like allow some kind of like, you know, people to, it's not disagreement, it's okay to be disagreement, but to negate your experience or to belittle you or insult you. And if you really do want to have a more open forum and allow people to comment, and maybe you're not really enough space to kind of deal with it, I asked a friend, I always recruit friends to come and like help me go through the comments. And I'm like, I've been receiving a lot of negativity lately. It's really upsetting me. I can no longer handle. I really don't want to keep reading all these messages about really nasty things about me. Can somebody else just come in there and just delete things for me so I don't have to read them? And that's more, you know, when you're just really at a place where you can no longer take it. But don't let them stop you from speaking up, because it's exactly really, really what they want, and just make it more difficult for them to speak up.
Anybody else?
Just remember that it's a very small but vocal minority of anti-feminists and men's rights activists. It can feel like the entire internet is after you, but really most people probably agree with you. And like you said, talking to friends, making fun of them is a great way to remind yourself of that.
And oftentimes I find trailblazers or visionaries or people that are putting themselves out there will have to confront all the negativity, but it's better to have a conversation, right, than no conversation. And so that is oftentimes exciting to me if I put something out there and get people pushing back, because how else are you going to get to where you want to go, right, but to address these kinds of people and topics. So thank you guys for that. I have a question from Lauren Hunt on social media. Advice for addressing subtle sexism in the workplace. When do you speak up and when do you let it go? Ladies.
Well, I think once again, we touched on this a little bit earlier, particularly when you come to this issue of microaggressions. That's something that happens quite often. I think it really has to be a personal decision to you about, is that particular instance worth your energy? However, if you're talking about something that's more substantive, that might really impact your ability to ascend up the ladder, or if you're being disrespected or somehow undermined at work, then it does deserve some more direct action. The sort of hit the button, hit the button responses, maybe to go to HR.
Right.
But short of that, I would say this is where you reach out to those relationships that you have, those mentors that you have, your network, people who have been through that, so that you can get some guidance from them in terms of how they have handled that situation, particularly if you have a good relationship with someone in that same culture that can give you some experience around how they were able to navigate it. Really, to me, those sorts of relationships are critical for helping you to be able to overcome challenges at work.
Absolutely agree.
I have some advice on how to do this. So here's the thing. I think that when you're in an office environment, if you just straight up call something sexist or racist or homophobic, people get very defensive. You've blown up the whole situation. It's a big old thing now. And you're unlikely to get the result that you want, and maybe you're unwilling to even do that for something that is, admittedly micro. So I find that it's very helpful to just don't use that language, even though it's completely true. So if someone says something a little bit sexist, try to find another true word to describe it. For instance, what they said was unprofessional. It was mean. It was unfair. Those are not minimizing what the person did. That's not writing it off or glossing over it. It's true. It was unprofessional. It was mean. It was unfair. And if you say those things, people are more likely to actually just apologize. Like, if you're mean, you apologize. If someone calls you sexist, you dig deeper. And I think that that language is just very helpful. If you really, really want to tamp it down, like everyone in your workplace is like really mealy-mouthed, then my favorite one is, again, that's not best practices.
Those work really well, I think, in corporate environments. Like, those are the things that I would, maybe in an office, especially if I feel like I don't want to escalate a situation. But I used to work in a construction site, and honestly, F you, Bob, was totally fine a lot of times. Like, they almost want you to respond in that manner for them to take you seriously. So when I was, like, kind of trying to tiptoe around it, it would be like, oh, whatever, she's a weak one. And they would keep doing it. And when I was literally like, middle fingers up, F-bombs here and there, they were just like, all right. and it immediately was like, woo, she's not one to like play with. And it was obviously very limited spaces you can actually use that. But if you can, like, please do, like I did. It was amazing. I wish I could do it all the time, to be honest.
So I want to take the time to thank you all, really everyone watching us via live stream and on C-SPAN, the panelists, the audience. I think there's no greater victory than to have a group of colleagues sit together and realize that we are, in fact, experiencing similar things on a daily basis, and in this unity, find the power to move ahead. So thank you very much to each one of you and to all of you here. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. Let's give another round of applause to our fabulous panel and moderator. And I want to thank NYU's DC campus again for giving us a home for important conversations such as this. And a warm thank you goes out to AAUW members as well. It's your support and generosity through the years that make this type of dialogue possible. What can we do to fight everyday sexism in the workplace? First, know your rights as an employee. Secondly, we need to create workplace cultures with a zero-tolerance policy towards sexual harassment. And lastly, we all need to stand up to sexism. Call it out when you see it, as our panel said. Call it out when you hear it or experience it. AAUW's created a step-by-step discussion guide, which you'll find online to facilitate an in-depth conversation in your community. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. I invite everyone today on air or in our audience to click join on AAUW's website and work with us. We encourage journalists to reach out and continue this conversation in a public forum and engage more people. And a special invitation goes out to America's business community to work with us to change the climate for women in the workplace as well. AAUW is a community of passionate activists. Together, our voices are amplified and real steps are taken towards a better climate for women and girls. Together, we will stand up to sexism. Thank you.